Chapter 8, Part 2, Entry Motives and Modes. Why do companies enter foreign countries and how do they do that? This first slide looks at why companies decide to enter foreign markets. There are a few reasons, but they can mostly go under these 5 categories. To gain access to new customers, so looking for a new market. To achieve lower costs through economies of scale, through more experience, and through increased purchasing power. So they're trying to lower costs, basically spread their costs over more product, or learn how to do things differently and lower costs that way in order to kind of maybe meet the needs of lower cost customers. So that's another motive. To further exploit core competencies. So you're really good at something, you're world class at something. Let's say, you're Honda and you're great at making very safe and cars that appeal to families. You want to sell those cars all around the world, not just in Japan. Fourth, to gain access to resources and capabilities located in foreign markets. So it may be that you're trying to access a certain skill set. It may be that you're trying to access cheap labor that's good. Not all cheap labor is created equal, and companies don't necessarily go to the lowest income places on the earth. They go to the places where they think they can get a lot of value, where they can get really good workers for an attractive price point. So those kind of resources and capabilities, it may be a raw material. It could be a lot of different things, but you don't find it in the current location. And then finally, to gain access to lower cost inputs of production. And again, that's related to human resources in a lot of cases. This slide just lists some of the location advantages that certain countries might have. So they may have lower wage rates, higher worker productivity, lower energy costs, fewer environmental regulations, lower tax rates, advantageous exchange rates, proximity to suppliers and technology-related industries, proximity to customers, lower distribution costs, or unique natural resources. And then one that didn't quite make a bullet point are Hofstede's cultural dimensions. You may want to access a risk-taking society. You may want to access a society with low power distance for the collaboration benefits that you might get there. There could be a number of things in terms of the cultural attributes of the society that you might want to get. So the whole point of this slide is why are we going into a country? It could be something that's located there. Okay, so we're going to look at 6 ways of entering a foreign country, 6 entry modes. 3 of these modes are low risk, but they have lower rewards. They don't require much control. And then 3 are much more hands-on, much higher risk, but the rewards can be much more lucrative. So the first one is exporting goods to foreign market. Here you use domestic plants, so a company that's based in the United States and then ships their goods overseas. A lot of times this is an initial strategy for pursuing international sales. So with this strategy, you can really limit your involvement in foreign markets by contracting with foreign wholesalers who are experienced in handling like distribution and marketing in a particular country. Okay, the second one is licensing. Licensing makes sense when a firm that has valuable technical know-how or a unique patented product doesn't have the organizational capability or the resources to enter a foreign market. So what this allows you to do is avoid risks of committing resources to a country or a market that's unfamiliar, that may be politically volatile, or economically unstable, otherwise risky. We talked about those risk factors in the last presentation. The big disadvantage, though, is the risk of providing valuable technological know-how to foreign companies and losing control over it. Basically, they may hijack your intellectual property. All right, And then the third one is similar to licensing. And this is franchising, and it's like licensing with much more control. Really, you micromanage all of the process, and so you allow people to sell your product, but only if they do the marketing, the customer service, branding, etc. The exact product type in the case of like a restaurant, like a KFC or a McDonald's, although those can vary in terms of what they offer. But you're very strict in terms of how you control it. So it's a much more involved licensing deal. Okay, and then the three that are higher risk are what we're going to spend a little more time on the next couple of slides. And those are establishing a subsidiary in a foreign market via acquisition, so at foreign acquisition. Another name for this is a brownfield. And then the second one, establish a subsidiary in a foreign market via internal development. That's called a greenfield. And you can remember those, that a brownfield is an acquisition because it's like you're harvesting something that's already there, right? So if you're a farmer, you don't harvest in the fall until the corn, whatever the crop is, turns brown. So it's a brownfield ready to go ahead and harvest. Whereas a greenfield is one that you plant and grow from a young new venture onward in that country, right? So that's why it's green, right? You're growing it yourself. You're not just coming in and harvesting it at the end. So that's do it yourself. And then the third way is kind of in some ways halfway between these two, and that is relying on strategic alliances or joint ventures to enter a foreign country. All right, so first we're going to look at a brownfield, acquiring a foreign subsidiary. Some advantages of this is that it's really kind of the quickest of the three in terms of hitting the ground running. You can make a quick, large-scale market entry. It does tend to avoid some entry barriers that foreign firms have. There don't tend to be restrictions on local companies on selling their company to a foreign firm, and so whereas if I want to enter Brazil or China or a lot of countries around the world, and I want to like do a greenfield and do it myself, there are a lot more hoops to jump through than just going in and purchasing an existing company. One advantage is that you may be able to access the acquired firm's skills. I mean, you will, as long as you keep letting them operate as they will, as they currently are. Whether you can transfer that to your own, the rest of your company is another thing, but you certainly get access to those skills. You don't have to build capabilities from the ground up. Disadvantages, the high cost of acquisition. There tends to be a big front-end cost. There is some complexity of the acquisition process, although I would argue that it's not any more complex than the next two, which are greenfield and a joint venture. And then with any acquisition, it's kind of like we talked about in the mergers and acquisitions section. There's a lot of integration of the firm's structures, cultures, operations, and personnel that have to be done. Okay, so a greenfield is what you do when you want total control of the venture. That's the big advantage of that. You want it to bear your company's DNA. You want another biology metaphor, you want your fingerprints to be all over it. You want to be able to go in and control exactly what that company looks like. It also allows you key learning effects. You know, when you operate in a new market, not only do you learn how to operate in that market, but you get expertise about going international that you can apply to many other markets. And it allows you to directly transfer your firm's technology skills, business practices, and culture, right? So if there's not some key capabilities that you're going after, but you want to like further leverage what it is you're already doing, a greenfield might make sense because it's going to be the easiest to transfer your competitive advantages to a greenfield versus the others. The disadvantages are the capital costs of initial development, and so that's going to be similar to the acquisition. You've got to build a plant from the ground up. There's this risk of loss due to political instability or lack of legal protection. Companies that are total outsiders that do greenfields do tend to be targets of overly zealous foreign countries that are looking to be predatory, right? That's one of the companies they're going to access first. And it also tends to be the slowest form of entry. You have to actually construct your facility. You have to make all these hiring decisions. You have to structure your organization. There's a lot going on. You're building something from the ground in a new environment. That's a lot. And so those are the big disadvantages to a greenfield, an entirely new operation. Finally, I have broken the alliances and joint venture strategies into 2 slides, just based on the size of the text and nothing else. Um, a lot of these have similar advantages to either the greenfield or the brownfield, usually the brownfield, but there are some advantages to it that the brownfield doesn't offer. The first thing is that you gain your partner's knowledge of local market conditions. That's the same as in a brownfield. You may gain technical expertise. That's a potential benefit. That could be in a brownfield, although you're more likely to find a company that has technical expertise that you can use from one that doesn't want to sell itself, right? From one that wants to keep on being its own entity. You can share distribution channels. The local partner probably already has distribution channels. It gives you access to customers. You reduce your competition by going with somebody that's already in the location, right? Increasing that monopoly power, or not really monopoly power, but market power. And then one that's key, and this one is actually an advantage of the joint venture over an acquisition, is that if that entity continues to exist on its own, the relationships with key government officials are more viable or more helpful, right? So if you just acquire a company and then the government might be like, oh, that American company bought you out, or that whatever the country is bought you out, and you might lose some of your of the social capital there. But in this case, establishing relationships with key government officials, you have an in based on the relationships that your partner already has. In terms of risks, there are a few. You are going to have to work closely with that partner that has very different culture and also different language. The culture is huge. Language, you can use translators, although that slows everything down. That slows communication. Communication is not as rich when you're going with somebody who is, maybe technically fluent in your language, but it's just, in terms of communicating with a different medium, it's not quite as rich as native speakers of the same language. So there tend to be some language barriers, but the cultural barriers, everything we talked about in the last presentation, really come to the forefront under a strategic alliance with a foreign partner. There tend to be more costs of establishing a working arrangement here than with the subsidiary. There's just a lot that goes in on the front end in ironing things out and making sure that the working relationship actually works. Third, and this is related to the second one, there may be conflicting objectives. There may be strategies that are, kind of pulling on each other that the two partners have. There may be different opinions about who's in control of what decisions and who has sway in given situations. And so all of that is going to be present, whereas in an acquisition, it's not present. You may potentially lose your legal protection of proprietary technology more so than the other options, right? Because you're going with a partner here. The partnership could disjoin, it could end, right? And the partner can potentially take what they learned from you and make money on their own. And then finally, overdependence on foreign partners for essential expertise and competitive capabilities. I remember in the last chapter, we talked about like a hollowing out of knowledge and capabilities that you use that you lose when you outsource things, right? And the same thing can happen if you rely on a strategic alliance for a lot of things. And so, you don't get that learning effect that you might with a greenfield. All right, so you can kind of see the different positives and negatives of the 3 major, more risky, higher level control ways of going in: the greenfield, the brownfield, and the strategic alliance. They've all got pros and cons. On the exam, I'm going to ask you a little bit about this. I'm going to ask you to pick an entry mode based on certain country conditions, and you're going to justify an entry mode. So you need to be familiar with these three.